Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum and I'm here today at the VHU, the Military History Institute in Prague in the Czech Republic, and we're taking a look at some particularly rare World War I machine guns that they have in their reference collection. Today, we have a true unicorn of a gun. This is a Steyr Repetierpistole M12. This is the full auto version of the Steyr Hahn M12 pistol. And these were used in very limited numbers by the Austro-Hungarian military in World War I. There were actually like 3 different machine pistol things that the Austro-Hungarians came up with to experiment, well, as experiments during World War I. There was this, there was their own copy of the Viller Perosa, and there was a really goofy Frommer-Stop-based Viller Perosa-like double machine gun, which I do also have a video on, so I'll link to that in the description if you're interested. But back to the subject of today's video, the M12, so first off, this is often referred to as an M12/16, which is a designation that exists nowhere in the actual official records. This was just called the Repetierpistole, or repeating pistol, or automatic pistol, sort of, depending on your translation, M12. And it was proposed by Steyr in November of 1916 in a letter to the Austro-Hungarian military. There was some potential interest in this, and they got an order for 200 of them, which they set about producing. Now, production on this was slow. Steyr was having a lot of labor issues at the time. Shortly before this order was being put together, just as a point of reference, in September of 1916, Steyr had a huge labor strike because its workforce literally didn't have food. This is 1916, 1917, during the Great War. There are major problems for all of the Central Powers. At any rate, there's the mechanism to do this was patented in 1916. 200 of these guns are ultimately delivered in February of 1917. And the one thing I want to point out before we take a closer look at this is that these guns were all provided with shoulder stocks. And we don't have the shoulder stock for the one here. And it's not a stock that attaches via slot. It's a stock that sort of has a cuff that slides up around the bottom of the grip on the pistol. So I think we've got a picture of one, but we don't have a physical example to show you. But the stock makes this, it turns this from a total goofy novelty into a theoretically viable pistol, because the mechanism here, by the way, gives you about 1,200 rounds per minute with a 16-round magazine, which means if you just hold the trigger down, the gun's empty in 0.75 seconds, which, like, without a stock is totally useless, and with a stock is still kind of dubious. This is loaded by stripper clip, 2 standard 8-round stripper clips. They actually experimented with different magazine sizes when these were originally being produced. They looked at 16, 20, and 24-round magazines. They ended up going with 16. They skipped 20 because, well, it's a fixed magazine that you have to load from stripper clips. The standard stripper clip held 8 rounds. 20 rounds wasn't an even number of clips and would be really awkward. They skipped 24 because loading the third stripper clip into one of those things was very, very difficult. As it was, loading the second stripper clip into this one was apparently quite the chore. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at this and how they made it work in full auto. All right, so we have our Repetierpistole 1912 here, and we have a standard M12 here for comparison. So fundamentally, the guns are almost identical. We'll take this one apart, and I'll show you all of the actual differences in a minute. But first, let's take a closer look at a few of the elements here. It's a little worn here, but we have a Steyr 1917 date. And then our serial number is marked on the slide and the frame. That's 130. So of course, this is out of the series of 200 of the full auto pistols that were made. On the opposite side, we have a Vienna 1916 proof mark. These guns were ordered in late 16, delivered early 17. So I suspect the frame was converted and proofed out in 16, or they used a frame that had already been proofed in 16, and then the slide was manufactured in early 17. And then of course we have our selector lever. That's the main visible difference other than the extended magazine. So this lever is pinned to the trigger, and it has 2 positions. We have a bottom detent for semi-auto and a top detent for full auto. Worth pointing out, this moves back and forth, and it's supposed to. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, obviously, the other major difference is this giant 8-round extension to the magazine. It's held in place by a screw in the back. We have a grip screw that's on the front instead of in the middle as with the standard pistols, because of course there's a spring going down there. And we still have the lanyard bar at the bottom of the now extended magazine. Other than that, all of the elements here are the same as a standard M12, so we have the same standard safety. We have our magazine release there. In order to load this, you lock it open, and then you feed 2 stripper clips of 8 rounds each through the top here. If you want to eject the rounds in the magazine, you use that lever, which drops the follower. That lever also allows you to close the slide if it's locked open empty like this. Now, to demonstrate the full auto, I've got it set to 16. I have to hold the follower down, or else it'll lock open instead of cycling. But pull the trigger, the hammer is going to drop on the first round. Hammer drops each successive time until I release the trigger, and then it remains locked back. So let's take a look at how it does that. All right, so I wanted to show you guys how the full auto version actually works. So we have our full auto one here, and we have a standard Steyr M12, Steyr Hahn, over here. So first off, a couple obvious differences. We have the backstrap assembly. On the regular gun, you've got your 3 springs, this being the most important one for us right now, and they're attached to the bottom lanyard hook that just sits in the pistol like this. On the full auto gun, of course, we have this magazine extension, so it's got a hook down here as well, which we've just screwed back in place, left on. This whole thing goes up into the gun like so. The springs here are identical, we just have a different set of levers to control them. If we look up close at the frames, there are a couple differences here. First off, we have a screw hole in the front of the full auto frame. That's because it's necessary to hold the grip screw. On the standard pistol, the grip screw is located right in the middle because, well, it's the bottom of the magazine. This guy holds it in place. You can't have that on the full auto, of course, because you've got a stack of cartridges going past it. It's interesting to note here that the full auto still actually has the holes in the frame for that screw, and I suspect this is because they were probably used in the tooling process. This was probably a hole, like they would get the frame fixed to or finished to a certain point and then use this as a reference point to lock it in place while performing other machining operations. So probably made sense to leave that hole in place on these. Now it's interesting that the semi-auto guns have this extra pair of slots cut in the inside of the frame. The full auto does not have them, and honestly, I don't know why. I don't have a good explanation for that. I'm not sure why they need to be in the semi-auto. I'm sure there's a reason, I just can't think of it offhand. Now, we also have an extra cut on the inside of the right side of the frame here. So you can see on the semi-auto guns, there's just one long slot for this, and this is the control lever. So if I take this out for a moment, there's a hole in the top of the trigger here, and I don't have the spring installed, but the way this works is that this little hook sits right here inside this spring. The hammer sits on this cutout, and when you pull the trigger, this bar is pulled forward, which pulls this forward, which pulls this forward, which pulls it off the hammer catch, and the hammer drops. On the full auto gun, we have that exact identical bar, and in semi-auto, it works the same way, but then we also have this second bar up on top. Then, of course, there is this connecting lever on the side of the gun. When I put that into full auto, the important thing here is that this actually has an oblong hole in it. So if I take the screw out, you can see that the hole in this lever and this lever are not circular, they're oblong, which means these two pieces can actually shift forward and backward. All right, so let's put these back on. Notice this one is pinned to the trigger. This one is not. And this screw is designed so that when it's tightened all the way down, it doesn't actually crimp these two parts in place. So it tightens against the inside of the frame, not against these two sliding pieces. Now, in order to see what this does, we need to take a quick look at the inside of the slides. All right, so this is our semi-auto slide, this is our full auto slide. The only difference between them is that this side rail has been cut back a bit, which gives us that now protruding tab that was previously a solid bar. That tab is going to ride right in this area right here. So this control bar is depressed down into the slide a bit. When this is in semi-auto, you can see that this tab is down and nothing interferes with the standard action of the pistol. When this lifts up into full auto there, now this tab is extended. When I pull the trigger, this tab comes up in between, and what we end up with is a solid link here to there to this top bar. And that top bar is also going to pull this spring forward. Now, the inside is already occupied by the regular linkage, so this new full auto linkage actually goes on the back side of the spring right here. And when these three parts all align like so, right there, they are going to actually pull this forward. Man, this is hard to demonstrate. There we go. They pull it forward like that. And what actually does that is the tab on the inside of the slide hitting right here and pushing all three of these parts forward. This is why it's essential that the hole here is oblong, so that this whole lever is actually moving back and forth when the gun's firing in full auto. All right, clear as mud. It's an interesting conversion in that it feels like it's got a whole lot of like weird linkages and pieces going on, but it's a way to do this conversion with a really minimal modification to the main components, to the slide and the frame. If you were going to design this gun from the ground up as a machine pistol, you could easily build all of this into the internal mechanism in all sorts of different ways. But that isn't what Steyr was doing. They had this existing gun and they need to convert it to full auto capacity with a minimum expense of, well, changes, minimum number of changes to existing production guns. So kind of an interesting way to do it. Like I said, a grand total of 200 of these were made as full auto stocked pistols, and they got their own serial number range from 1 to 200. There were then also a batch of 50 guns made as double pistols with a single stock and trigger mechanism, sort of a shoulder-fired Villa Perosa kind of concept. And they made 50 of those, which means 100 guns, and we're pretty sure that those followed these in production sequence with serial numbers from 201 to 300. Now, I say we're pretty sure because there are no complete examples surviving. There's one of these pistols that survives with a serial number over 200. There are then about, if I remember correctly, about a dozen, maybe 15 of the M12 Repetier pistols total surviving today. So they're extremely rare guns. There are a decent number of fakes out there because they're distinctive and cool, and there's not that much difference between them and the standard regular M12. It's also worth noting that there's at least one example surviving of a full auto M12 that was converted back to an 8-round semi-auto pistol, because of course, I mean, this sort of thing isn't really all that practical. So like that is a possibility of having one back converted into a regular semi-auto pistol. But there are some references out there that say that like a batch of 10,000 of these were manufactured, and that is total nonsense. The documentation on this does survive from World War I, and it's 200 guns. So really, really rare. All of these Austro-Hungarian full auto pistol caliber experiments were done late in the war, too late to really have any significant impact. The economic cost of making this sort of experimental stuff was too high to really be viable. None of them had a substantial impact on war progress, but they are, of course, extremely cool to take a look at today. So I'd like to give a big thanks to the VHU for giving me access to this very rare piece to film for you guys. If you find yourself here in Prague, if you're going to be vacationing in Prague, definitely set aside at least a half day to check out their Army Museum. That is part of the VHU complex, and it is a pretty extensive museum with a lot of good exhibits like you would normally expect, plus a big huge wall of Czech experimental and prototype guns that are also very interesting to take a look at. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. We are only about 2 weeks away from Christmas, but that does not mean that it is too late to get something cool for yourself or for that person in your life who is also interested in learning more about firearms. At Headstamp Publishing, we have a slew of awesome books available in stock, shipping right now, and if you order soon, in time for Christmas. So we have our more coffee table style books. We have our World War II series, Small Arms of World War II. We have United States and a USSR. We also have our most recent arrival in the warehouse. That is NATO Battle Rifles of the Cold War. That is super cool. I'm really excited about that one. We have Pistols of the Warlords, which is sort of a halfway between a coffee table book and a reference book about all of the weird and wonderful, bizarre pistols that came out of pre-World War II China. All unique, all distinct, really interesting subject, to me anyway. And then we have our more reference-oriented books like Rifles on the Danube about Hungarian AKs, of course my first book, Chassepot de FAMAS on French military rifles, Jonathan Ferguson's book, Thornycroft SA-80 on British bullpup rifles. We have a book called Clockwork Basilisk on the Collier, the early self-cocking Collier revolvers. Fascinating, very niche, in-depth tome there. And then a few others that I can't even fit on the table. We have small set of monographs on who invented the wheel gun. We have Tobacco of the Emperor about Japanese World War II and pre-World War II tobacco, which is a subject that sounds really niche, but actually pretty darn cool. Swords of the Emperor, a reference guide or a pictorial guide to mostly the hilts of Imperial Japanese swords. Arming the Dragon, another short monograph on Chinese warlord era Mauser rifles. All sorts of cool stuff. Tremendous amount of different things that you can go check out and pick from over at Headstamp Publishing. I'll include a link down in the description text. Merry Christmas, y'all. Thanks for watching.